Sam, and with me as always is Dr. Robert. How are you?
Hey Sam, how you doing today?
I'm good. It's just you and me today.
You know what? I miss these times. I love our guests, but sometimes it's nice just to catch up and shoot the not appropriate on air, but catch up on stuff. So it's good.
Well, we always also chat a bit before, chat a bit after, so it's always nice to have our catch up days,
Uh,
where we get to just kind of chat. And um, today we're gonna actually start talking about nutrition, which I'm really excited about. This has been like a work in progress for almost a year, I think, right?
it's been tough getting not tough, it's just people are busy and trying to get
Yeah.
all the content that we want for this series has been a lot of just moving things around, and so I'm excited
Yeah.
to share the next couple episodes with people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So just what we're doing today is sort of an introduction to nutrition in small animals and cats and dogs. Um the reason this was a really important one for us is I think that maybe it's one of the most important topics that I talk about ad nauseum, like every day, multiple times a day, for
Mhm.
so many different reasons. And even as an emergency vet, I mean, I'm sure this is something that comes up for you too, right?
All the time. I wholeheartedly agree with the statement that it's probably the most talked about discussion because even when I mean, if it's like most of them, I see it more so in the case of like their dogs having GI upset because of something.
Yep.
They want about the bland diets but I've had owners like their pet's really sick. They're like, "Hey, what do you feel about raw diets?" I'm like, "Not the time. We have a more important thing to talk about right
Right.
now.
Right.
Like your dog's like can't breathe. Like the raw
Yeah.
diet doesn't matter.
This
You
isn't the
know,
time. Yeah. That would
what's
make a
up?"
difference. um,
But I think it's a really great topic because I don't think even vets are completely
we
on
don't
the
all
same.
agree, I don't think, right?
I
I
would
think
agree.
there are certain tenets of nutrition that I think we can all agree on. Now, remember that there are not even vets that all agree on vaccine schedules and you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? You know what I mean? Like there is not. So, I mean, there's a lid for every pot. And I think what we're really
I like that
trying
saying.
to what we're really trying to get across today is that these are we're trying to introduce a few different types of food out there, trying to make them a bit more accessible, try to see where they come from, let people kind of understand what goes into a food. Not that we're necessarily pushing a specific food or endorsing a specific food or any of those things, but more so, I don't think that people really understand, the research, the development, even in a non-prescription food, a kibble, whatever, however people like to put them in categories. You know what I mean? And we
Absolutely.
kind of got a little glimpse, even just well, now I don't know when this will air, but like last week or the week before, we were talking to Anya from Happy Bond. And
Mhm.
originally, when we had first kind of talked to her about what she was doing, it had started out more as a topper, but they have a complete and balanced food. And I think she got into a little bit of the 2-year process that it took to have a biochemist, I believe, and animal nutritionist. Like that was absolutely involved in the making of her food. And that was like a happy surprise for us, right? Like so we didn't, we were kind of like, oh, this actually fits with what we're doing. So we're
Yeah, timing was really good with that one
yeah.
because she's built a pretty cool product, and but there's so many. I think that's the tough
Oh
part.
my.
Like if we could literally do probably 3 years of the podcast if we interviewed every company that made a dog food.
Yeah, it's
So,
true. It's true. And sort of get their ethos and like try to understand why they made their food and like how they chose the ingredients and all that type of stuff.
mhm.
Yeah, I'm not even sure we would even get like we might get an aisle. Like you know what I mean? 'Cause there's so many.
There's so many, and I think that's part of owners' concerns too when they walk into a PetSmart or some other dog food
Hmm.
store. It's literally lined with different dog foods, and like
Yeah.
we have our own perceptions of what's good
Oh
for
yeah.
our pet. And there's the veterinarian's one, and there's breeders' perceptions, and then there's social media's perception, and it's just hard to tie all those together. So I'm excited to kind of say, hey, here's a couple options. Take a listen and find out some good information whether you can choose kind of one that might be best for your pet, or just at least do some more investigating on your work.
Yeah. And I think the goal of today really is to maybe introduce how you make some of those objective how to kind of go about it sort of scientifically and like the way that I would recommend that an owner go about something because I do think people get like analysis paralysis. They're just like, okay, I was told that this food is poison and this food is great and I can't afford this food, so now I have to give my dog this. And it's like there's something at every price point
Yeah.
that is good. And making one company the boogeyman or saying that one other company is going to save every dog, I don't know that that's true. I think it's fair to try to align with, like, well, how do you eat? What's your environment? What's the likelihood that you're going to prepare a food? Because even some of the commercial foods, they still need preparation. Not all foods are just scoop them out of a bag and put them in. But if you know that that's what you have time for, but it is important to you that you kind of have some idea what you're putting in your pet, I think that it's nice to know that there are like very well outlined ways to sort of look at nutrition,
Yeah.
and think about it a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll say honestly, from these podcasts, I've learned some things as well. So we're always still learning, even as
Oh
veterinarians.
yeah.
There's one podcast particular that usually I would have steered away from, but I'm more open to it now after listening to like being a part of that podcast. Or actually, I was listening to that podcast, so I'd actually go participate. So
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So one
yeah,
of the foods that we'll introduce, yeah, going through it. And that's the other thing too, because like even just being a veterinarian and like your friends call you and are like, "Hey, I just got a puppy. What do I feed him?" And I'm like, usually what I say is, well, what's your goals? Like what do you like? What do you care about? What I mean? Do you want a kibble or do you want a fresh food? Do you want a home cook? Do you want, what do you want? What do you want out of this? And you
and what
need
your
to know
budget
that
is
first
too.
and foremost.
Honestly, that plays
What's
a
your
role in.
budget? Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I can't even keep up with all of these fresh foods out there too. I mean, there's just so many of them. And we've been fortunate to at least get to go chat with a couple of them at the conferences. Some of the ones that have a presence there. Not all of them do. And so that's the other part of it too. So what do you do if you're an owner and you don't have access to, like, we were just at Western States Veterinary Conference in
the,
Vegas, and we had the chance to talk. I think we talked to the farmer's dog, we talked to Just Food for Dogs,
the,
while we were there, and I made a point to actually have a conversation, because I had heard some rumors about, and I'm not going to say what they were or whatever, but about one of the companies, and like I wanted to know right from them, like, is this true? And they're like, no, that's not true. And they're, telling me about, what their philosophy is and like how they approach things. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. Um, and so that's super helpful, but I have that access, you know?
exactly.
And so one thing that I tell people, and this is like, this can be very overwhelming. So I think it's really important to explain how to do it. Um,
The
is there are something called the WASAVA guidelines. What is it? WASAVA? I'm
FAVA.
gonna I'm gonna say it the right way. Yes, WSAVA.
Yeah.
And you can look them up. They're free access. Anybody can go to wasava.org, and they have an entire thing. I'm looking at it on my phone. That's why I'm like holding it right here. But a whole, basically, it's a nutritional assessment guideline. So that is
It,
actually meant for veterinarians. It's not that part of it. I mean, you can look at it as an owner. If you want to read it and you find this interesting and you want to nerd out like the way we do it. You'll learn. It's great. And you'll understand why we ask the questions we ask and all that type of stuff, and like how we do a nutritional assessment as veterinarians. And that's kind of part of our everyday, especially for me, right? Maybe not for you, but you need to know what they're eating. You need to understand
oh
their
yeah.
their lifestyle, their environment. Um, but about halfway through, there is a way to assess um food, like how
Yeah.
what you want to feed, how to assess a company. And I think like it might be helpful to kind of go through them if you think that that would be useful.
Yeah,
um
absolutely.
just because I really feel like it's important for people to understand that they're allowed to do this. They're allowed to ask these questions. And if the food you're feeding will not answer these questions, or you can't get a reasonable answer that makes you comfortable, it's probably not the best food to feed. And I don't need to disparage a company. I don't need to disparage a person. I don't need to say anything, because you should either be able to look at this and say, I feel like this is reasonable and I have met these things and I'm good with it. And
Yeah.
if it matters to you to be feeding a really good food, you should be able to answer these questions. And I think that that's pretty true of any food. Don't you think?
Yeah. I would think it's very reasonable. And I actually, Sam was kind enough to pass along these guidelines to me beforehand, because I'm not as familiar with them. But looking through them, I think there's a really good assessment of like what should be looked at when these things come up. So, yeah, let me chat about a couple of them.
Yeah. One thing I think we should just mention is like AFCO guidelines when those come up, like what AFCO is, and that's just the American Feed Control Officials, and so they're the ones that kind of make the rules, I guess. Rules, I don't know if they're rules, but the guidelines about how to formulate food, and
Yeah,
so every balanced and complete food, so just at the very baseline of food analysis in this country. This is not true in every country, so I don't know the rules of like every country, but in this country, AFCO guidelines will give you a complete and balanced diet. So if you don't have an AFCO statement, already you're kind of starting out with a problem. I think
yep,
that
I would
that's
agree.
like the most basic thing to look for.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's step one. If they don't have the stamp on the bag, move on personally, because I think you're going to start barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah. Well, then, complete and balanced is just like step one, right? Like it should be complete and balanced. Now, the thing that is also interesting about AFCO guidelines is that it's gonna break it up by life stage. And
Yeah,
so sometimes it is really important to look at it and just say, like, see that the AFCO it's talking about like for growth, for puppies. There's ones for I think reproduction, and then for adult maintenance. I don't think they actually have one. It what I'm looking here for senior or geriatric pets, which
okay.
I know that they have mature formulas. So I have not actually looked at that specifically, but my understanding is that's mostly except for the foods that are formulated specifically like the bright minds and things like that. um
Yeah.
uh Marketing is my understanding.
Oh yeah, 100%. A lot of it's marketing.
Yeah,
This
yeah, yeah.
my
So
French food, like, or whatever the ones I
yeah,
specifically
like
don't.
the
It's like,
senior, like over 7, you're kind of like, I mean, maybe it has a little more glucosamine, but like not even enough to matter. So
yeah.
yeah.
Now they all have probiotics in them, all like kind of fun jazz. It's great.
Yeah. And then the next one that they have on here, I think is an interesting one because it talks about like the manufacturer's reputation as a food maker. The problem is with that is that, I mean, you can find something negative about pretty much anybody. If you want to go
Oh,
online and find somebody say some horrible thing about food that is perfectly safe and perfectly fine to feed your dog, you'll find it. Google will tell you exactly what you want to know. So,
and I think
that's
it's
a tricky one.
important. And I think one thing to mention here is the brands that have been around a long time. I'm not gonna like. I'm not saying I'm endorsing them specifically, but
Yeah.
they usually have a pretty good protocol in place because they've been around for a while. They've got all the issues out. Those newer brands, just like anything, any new company, is gonna have these issues.
Yeah.
But the old school ones, like the ones like, no offense, your Royal Canins, your Hills, your Purinas, they've got a lot of research into their food. They've got a lot of like protocols in place. They've been around the block, and
Yeah.
there's a reason why. I know everybody's worried about them being processed foods because they're kibble, but they're still good, healthy option, just like many other options.
Well, right. And the thing is that I think it's also like really important that people understand we get no kickbacks from any of these companies. Nobody
No,
has paid me a dime
I'd
for
like to have
this.
one at that point.
That would
Sure.
be really great. That we could get some
Yeah.
money from them. But no, we do not get any money from them, and that we
And
should
if you're
get.
listening, feel free to call me. No,
I know, right? I mean, if you want to
Nick,
make donations to myBalto, we'll give it away to pets. How about
fine. Yeah,
that?
exactly.
um, and then so some of them talk about like things that don't really have too much value for us because they're super unregulated, like being holistic or human grade or premium. I don't actually think there's any checkups on that. So a lot of times that's marketing. Sometimes it can, if it can be substantiated by you having a conversation with them, that's different. But for the most part, a lot of that stuff is marketing, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, the most important one that I think is very interesting for people to understand is it actually is a list of questions that you can contact the manufacturer. So if it's not a commercial diet that you have known about, that you've fed for a long time, or you are just wanting to know, is it true that Hills is the devil, or which I don't believe, right? So I'm just saying, like, but those are the things that are out there, right? Is that like other companies are saying, oh, this one's poison or that one, you know what I mean? And I use Hills every day. I use their medical
Yeah.
diets. I think that they're great. So I'm not saying that. I'm saying that that's in the ether. But
Yeah. My dog's
um
been on here for 13 years and he is,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So yeah. So we're certainly not in the place to say anything negative about anybody. But I think this is very interesting. So these are the questions that are listed here in the WASAVA guidelines that you can contact any food company, and you should feel comfortable doing this, and asking if they have a veterinary nutritionist or an equivalent on staff at their company. And are they available for questions or consultations? I don't think most people realize that they can do that. I think that any company worth their salt is going to say, yes, we have that. And yes, we are happy to help because they
Especially in this
want
day and age, because you have to be competitive. And honestly,
it.
by not having it, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Because I honestly, I do not trust a company that does not at least have an advisor or someone on their team that's a veterinary nutritionist.
No, absolutely. Or like a feed specialist, right? Like so like a biochemist or
Yeah.
something like that. Like there are people with PhDs in nutrition that I believe understand nutrition and understand biochemistry as long as they understand it for animals, because what we need as people and what animals need are different. But there is an education level, there is sort of a foundational education level that
Mhm.
I people can research all day. It is not the same. Doing a Google search is not an actual education in nutrition,
Yeah.
right?
I,
um i I don't mean to offend anybody by that, but it's not.
you're so offensive, Dan. So
I know.
offensive.
I don't mean to offend. And then who formulates your food and what are their credentials? So again, that's what we're talking about. So sometimes there are um because I know that some companies will have more than one person, right? So they're usually working together. But anyway, you should know who formulated the food. I do think that there are like sometimes some questions of like, well, did somebody formulate it but then leave the company? So now you have no one to stay up to date or troubleshoot or things like that. So that's an important thing to know too. And then of course you have to also find your comfort zone. Like if you're okay with the fact that it was formulated by somebody who has those credentials and you don't need them to be on staff anymore, you should be comfortable asking that question and making that decision. I would like an ongoing presence for the
I
food
agree.
I feed my dog personally.
Yep.
Um, okay, then which of the diets are tested using AFCO feeding trials and which are done by nutrient analysis? So that goes back to the AFCO guidelines. There are two different ways that things are listed. So sometimes it'll be listed that well, let's see what's the wording exactly. Let me find it because it's very specific. With AFCO it says like either feed trials substantiate that this food is, whatever, or this food AFCO has been formulated, like they've proved that it's formulated. So there's two different types of AFCO statements. I swear it's here somewhere. Um, and that is really helpful to know because there's a difference. One is saying that the nutrients in the food are good nutrients and they have formulated it in such a way that it meets those guidelines. The other is saying we did that and then we fed it and we substantiated that it did what we said it was going to do. So
No, no.
obviously a feeding trial is going to be superior to just a formulation. Does
Well, it's
that
the
make
proof.
sense?
Yeah, the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah,
So it's shows that actually works, which is a big deal.
right. And it's not to say, right, that anyone that has done a feed trial is totally beyond reproach. I'm not saying that. But I'm
Mhm.
saying when you are sitting here going, oh my gosh, which is the best food? This is one way to start weeding out some of the ones that aren't, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay. And then it says, what specific quality control measures do you use to assure the consistency and quality of the product line? To me, that's huge.
Oh yeah.
What happens when and if you have a recall? And so some of the bigger companies that we've all been using forever, they've had recalls. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's never happened, but they deal with them well. They have a really good way of making sure that it's taken care of and that they're dealing with it and taking care of the situation. um
Yeah.
and that's huge because everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face, right? Isn't that the story? So you have to know how you're going to deal with adverse things. That's the most important thing. Um, and then where are your foods? Where are your food products? Where are they produced and where are they manufactured? And can you visit the plant? I thought that was kind of interesting.
This is the plan. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I think that as
yeah.
an option. I mean, sure, why not?
It would never have occurred to me, but I guess that, hey, if you want to know and you want to see it, you should be able to ask. I
You want
like
to
that.
know?
Um, will you provide complete product nutrient analysis for the dog and cat of interest, including digestibility values? I think they should be able to do that. That's great. Caloric value per gram, can, cup of food, which almost anybody that has an AFCO statement has that right next to it. So
Yeah, yeah.
you should be able to know that, because the thing is, if you have an overweight pet and you don't have the information about calories, you are in trouble. You, or
Yes.
an underweight pet, right? You need to know how many calories they're getting. So that's really important. Um, and then what kind of research on your products have been conducted, and are the results published in a peer review journal? That's good to know.
Yeah. No,
So,
absolutely.
and then there's ways to evaluate homemade foods, which is also really important. For my money, I would say you need, if you're going to be putting together a home cooked diet, you need to do it with the help of a veterinary nutritionist. Um, and there are services. So there's actually like an entire website, the nutrition, what's it
Yeah,
called?
it's
But it's like the veterinary nutrition, like the diplomates. What is it? It's the American Academy of Veterinary Nutrition. You can actually go on there, and a lot of nutritionists will offer their services to formulate foods for your dog. Um,
no,
if
no,
yeah, oh yeah, no, there's like, you can definitely get someone to help you do that, and then but those can be expensive, right? Because that's basically getting procuring somebody to do that for you based on your dog, and and all that.
yeah,
Or you can go on like websites like balanceit.com, and that is put together by nutritionists, and it is free, which is nice. And it actually, you can even formulate veterinary prescription diets. So I've had people do kidney diets through there, before a lot of the fresh foods were available, and a lot of them are great, that are out there now, that have veterinarians on staff that are trustworthy, good, all these things. Even, come to find out, like Happy Bond, like she worked with a vet, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of really, really good fresh options out there. So I'm not, and hers is shelf stable too, which is interesting. That's different than some of the
oh
other
yeah,
ones. Yeah. So um I think that, it's nice to know that you can for free formulate something. And for some of the dogs like that don't eat, that have kidney disease, it's a really, that was a nice option. Now Just Food for Dogs has those options too, and so that's great. And I mean, there's just some really good ones out there. I mean, I don't want to be like necessarily like, saying anything specific about different food companies at all, but sometimes, you need to have different options. And I don't think that, this like fear mongering about kibble and all this stuff, like I feed my dog kibble. I'm not anti kibble. I have no problem with it. Um I think that you need to find what aligns with your beliefs, your ideals, and if you want to feed fresh, totally do it. Just make sure it's a good food. Maybe go
yeah,
on here, take a look at page 6 on those SAVA guidelines, and just like have an idea who and what, is the person that made your food. And if it's you, make sure you're doing it complete and balanced.
yeah. So that's always an option. And honestly, I've met more people that cook their own dog's food nowadays because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, they have more time than I do, but it's crazy because of it. And like your dogs eat better than I do most of the time. It's
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah,
Like it's nice to see owners caring for their pets and what they're putting in
yeah,
their bodies, just like they put in their own bodies. Very important.
absolutely.
Just don't believe everything you read, and take an opportunity to like. I think these guidelines are an excellent way to start there, and
Mm-hmm.
just don't be mesmerized by the marketing. I think that'd be the big thing. Like
Yeah,
you can quality in a brown bag. I
yeah,
promise. It's just
oh yeah,
something about the quality of the product, and those ones that have been around for a while are always good candidates. But they have a lot of great new products that are coming out, and I like to switch to a fresh food one day. To be honest with you,
yeah. No, I've actually, it's interesting because like just learning a little bit more about some of the dumb ones that are out there. I haven't actually compared prices yet, so I guess that's the other part for me, is that like I'm sort of,
yeah,
I don't know,
exactly.
you know what I mean? That might be a factor. Um, and with the home cooking one, the way that they break it down, you can actually do like large aliquots of food and like freeze them
Uh,
and things like that. So they
that's
they
nice.
actually have it broken down that way. So if you want to feed each night, if you want to do it like as you go, or if you want to do 2 weeks at a time, if you want, it's nice. I mean, it's a really well put together website, and it's not the only one. It's just one that sticks in my head every time somebody wants to cook for their dog. I'm like, okay, go on this website. You know what I mean? And they do sell supplements on there, I will say. Like to make sure, like vitamins basically. So they'll tell you sort of what's missing from their
Yes.
diet if you just cooked that, and then this is what you need to make it up, and they'll tell you what, like, oil sources you need to use or whatever else, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah,
very
and I want
comprehensive.
to like emphasize that point. Like it's important to have your home cooked diets or any diet checked on these guidelines because
Yes.
Sam and I have both seen the veterinary industry as a whole has seen what happens when you don't feed your pet a balanced diet. They
Mm-hmm.
can develop heart disease. There's a lot of bad things that happen to your pets when you don't feed them a proper diet.
Oh yeah.
So to take that stuff out.
Well, and I think also too understanding that these diets don't need you to monkey with them, right? Like they I have seen a lot of bad consequences of owners being like, "Well, I add this and I add that and I add this." And it's like, "Yeah, but the food you're feeding is already kind of covered that. You don't need to do that. If you want to give treats, fine, 10% of the diet can be treats, but it should not be more than that because you're going to start throwing things off and then people are like, "Oh, I added, coconut oil and I added this and that." Is like, yeah, but that's not really the right medium chain fatty acid for like what's happening. So you're just going to make your dog obese and possibly cause, other problems down the line. So it's like you aren't a nutritionist and that's okay, but they have different amino acid needs than we do. And
Yes.
your dog isn't a little person. Your cat certainly isn't a little dog and definitely can't be a vegetarian because they are an obligate carnivore. So don't feed them a vegetarian diet.
Your dog is not a wolf. I'm
Yes, your
sorry.
dog is not a wolf.
They're very different from way back then. If you try to put your dog in the wild, I guarantee they will not survive as well as the wolf does. So it's just one of the big things I like to emphasize. Like things have changed. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
They tend
And we'll introduce I think it's important that people understand, like we said, like we're not saying any of the food companies that are coming on are ones that were interested to come on and interested to talk to us. And we've reached out to lots of them. We were open for them. Both Robert and I have always sort of been sort of like uncomfortable with the idea of raw. We have a raw food coming on, and actually talking to them the way they do it, you can answer every Wasava guideline, and I talked to their nutritionist. So will all of you because she's on her going to be on our show, and it was great, and I learned a lot from it. So as not to just like decide against something before I knew about it. You know what I mean? And I learned that there is a way to do it safe and there is a way to protect your dog, and and it can have benefits. And so to me, I definitely feel almost humbled by all of the different ones we've done because I've learned something in each of them. And so I'm excited to kind of have this series come up. I'm excited for people to see what's out there, but understand this is like we're scratching the surface. We're so surface level here.
yeah.
But this is how you can evaluate it for yourself. You should still talk to your veterinarian. They know what your specific pet needs. Because if your dog has kidney disease, then this is a totally different conversation. If your dog has liver disease, if your dog has heart disease, if your dog is obese, if your dog is underweight, if your dog is growing, pregnant, lactating, all these things will affect how you feed them. If your
Yeah.
dog's prone to pancreatitis, you can't just give them anything. So it is so important that you partner with your veterinarian. Like I
Yes.
cannot stress that enough. They are your partner, they are your buddy. If they are not your buddy, find a different veterinarian. I don't know what to say.
Hi, buddy.
Find a buddy with a DVM behind their name or a
Exactly.
VMD. Pen.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I had to do it different.
That'd be different. But yeah, I'm excited for the next couple podcasts. Hope everybody learns a lot from them. I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of value there. And as always, if you have questions about those things,
Podcast at mybalto.com. And I hope people just kind of keep checking in with what mybalto's doing too, because we're really got exciting things happening, and we're so kind of lucky to be doing this still after a year and a half, and I enjoy
yeah,
it so much. So I'm just thankful for everybody who listens, and um I'm thankful to learn every week, every day.
I'm thankful to hang out with you, Sam, because you keep me sane during the week. So,
Yeah. Well, I am thankful to see my good friend every week, which is great.
so yeah,
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening. This has been the Pause It podcast. We look forward to teaching you guys about nutrition. See y'all soon.